A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all. I'm Charles Dickens. I've often been quoted as saying, in this brief life of ours, it is sad to do almost anything for the last time. This is my last reading and lecture tour of America. Thank you so much for inviting me to your charming little theater. I love the United States. I have been treated here like a celebrated person. I have met your president, your members of Congress, and I dare say, well done on your independence. Well deserved. I am here tonight to relate my sweeping Christmas novella, A Christmas Carol. It is a story of redemption, a story of reclamation. It's a ghost story. Ooh. Behind me, you shall see images which can be translated to shadows of my mind's eye. Lords and ladies, masters and mistresses, a story is what I have promised you, and a story is what you shall get. A Christmas Carol. Marley was dead. To begin with, there is no doubt whatever about that. The registry of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and Marley were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole friend, and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come from the story I'm going to relate. But Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door. Scrooge and Marley. The firm's name was Scrooge and Marley. And sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. But Scrooge answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and didn't thaw 1 degree at Christmas. Extreme heat and cold had no influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm him. No wintry weather chill him. The foulest weather didn't know how to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and sleet and hail could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely. Scrooge never did. No one ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, when are you coming to see me?" But they would avoid his gaze, like one with the plague. No one ever said, "My dear Scrooge, when are you coming to dine with us?" But were frightened by Scrooge's presence, and would dispel themselves to the opposite side of the street. Even the blind men's dogs seemed to know him, and when they saw Scrooge coming on, they would tug their masters up into doorways or up courts, and then would wag their tails as if they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? This was the very thing he liked. To edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve, Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. The door of his counting house was open that he may keep an eye on his clerk, Bob Cratchit, who, in a dismal little cell beyond a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. And indeed, he couldn't replenish it because Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. And when the clerk entered with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to depart, whereof the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, on which effort, he being not a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, Fred. "Bah! Humbug! Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do! Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Well, come then. What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." "Bah! Humbug! Oh, don't be cross, Uncle." "Well, what else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this?" Merry Christmas. Out upon your Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you? But a time for paying bills without any money. A time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer. If I could work my will, every idiot that goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stick of holly through his heart. He should. Let me keep Christmas in my way and you keep it in yours. Keep it? But you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone then. Much good it may do you. Much good it has ever done you. There are many things in this world, Uncle, from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited. I dare say Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I've always thought of Christmas time when it has come around. Apart from the veneration due its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, as a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year where men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they were really fellow travelers to the grave and not some other race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Being instantly sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Scrooge exclaimed, "Let me hear another sound from you, Bob, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You are quite a powerful speaker, nephew. I wonder you don't go into politics." "Oh, don't be angry, Uncle. Come dine with us tomorrow." Scrooge said that he would see him in H-E-L. Yes, he went the full length of that expression and told him that he would see him in that extremity first. "But why, Uncle? Why?" "Why? Why did you get married?" "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love," growled Scrooge, as if this were the only thing more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. "Good afternoon, sir." "I have never asked anything from you. I don't want anything from you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon, sir. I am sorry, with all my heart, to find you so resolute. I have never had any quarrel with you to which I have been a party. But I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I shall keep my Christmas humor to the last, and therefore a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Bah! Humbug! And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, sir! Scrooge's nephew left the office. Scrooge's clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, let two other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now they stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They carried books and papers in their hand and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe, said one of the gentlemen, referring to the lists. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night. Oh, well, I'm sure his liberality is well represented in his surviving partner. We choose this season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, because we find it more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at this time. Many thousands are without common necessaries, sir, and hundreds of thousands are without common comforts, sir. Are there no prisons? Oh, yes, there's plenty of prisons. And the union workhouses? Are they still operational? Oh, yes, sir, they are. I wish I could say they were not. But some of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to give the poor and destitute some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time, as of all others, when want is felt very keenly, sir, and abundance rejoices. How much shall I put you down for, sir? Nothing. Oh, you wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone. If you ask me what I wish, that is my answer, gentlemen. I don't make myself merry at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help support the institutions I mentioned. They cost enough. And if people are badly off, they must go there. Well, some of them can't go there, sir. Some would rather die. Well, if they had rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon, gentlemen. The two gentlemen left the office. At length, the time for shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted to the fact to the expectant clerk, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat. You'll want the whole day tomorrow, I suppose? If quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient. It's not fair. If I was to hold back one half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used. And you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work. But I'm sure you'll want the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed. Scrooge walked homeward, bending into the icy winds. He lived in chambers that had once belonged to his deceased partner, Jacob Marley. They were a gloomy set of rooms. The house was old enough now and dreary enough, for no one lived in it but Scrooge, the other offices being all let out. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The The fog and frost so hung about the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it, night and morning, during his whole residence in that place. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since last his mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. Then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, with his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker of the door, not the knocker, but Marley's face! Marley's ghostly face! As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. His blood was conscious of a terrible sensation which had been a stranger from infancy, but he put his hand back on the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, opened the door, and walked in. Ah! Humbug! Scrooge lighted his candle. Quite satisfied, he closed the door, locked himself in, double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secure against surprise, he took off his hat, he took off his cravat and cape, he put on his dressing gown and slippers and nightcap and sat down before the fire. As he threw his head back in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell. A disused bell which hung in the room and communicated, for some purpose now forgotten, with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and a strange, unusual dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so slowly at the outset that it scarcely made a sound. But soon, it rang out loudly, as did all the bells in the house. It might have lasted a half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun together, and they were succeeded by a great clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a chain across the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Then Scrooge remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door blew open with a booming sound. Oh! Then he heard the noise much louder, on the floors below, and coming up the stairs and coming straight towards his door. Bah! Humbug, I won't believe it! His color changed, though, when it came on through the heavy door and burst into the room before his eyes. I know him! Marley's ghost! The same face. The chain he wore was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of keys, cash boxes, padlocks, ledgers, heavy purses wrought of steel. Its body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on the coat behind. Though Scrooge looked the phantom through and through, and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes. He was still incredulous and fought against his senses. What do you want of me? March! Who and what are you? In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down? I can. Do it then. The spirit sat on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. The spirit cried, "You don't believe in me?" "I don't." "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because a little thing affects them. A slight disturbance of the stomach makes them cheats. You could be a bit of undigested beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more gravy about you than grave, whatever you are." The ghost sat perfectly motionless. Its hair was agitated, as from the vapors of a hot oven. "Bah! Humbug, I won't believe it!" At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry. And shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held tight to his chair to prevent himself from falling into a swoon. How much greater was his horror, though, when the ghost, unwrapping a bandage from round its head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its chest. "Mercy! Why do you come to me? Do you believe in me or not?" "I do. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is doomed to do so after death. It is condemned and doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me, witnessing what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness. Ah! You are fettered, Marley. Tell me why. I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is the pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since, Ebenezer. It is a ponderous chain. Speak comfort to me, Marley. Speak comfort, Jacob Marley. I have none to give. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you what I would. Very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. In life, I never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me! In life, my spirit never roved upon our money-changing hole. Oh, not to know
that one space of regret can never make amends for one life's opportunity misused. Yet such a man was I. Such was I.
You were always a great man of business, Jacob. A great man of business.
Business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, benevolence, forbearance were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Hark you. My time is almost gone. I came here tonight, Ebenezer, to warn you that you may yet have a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring, Ebenezer.
Well, you've always been a good man to me, Jacob. I thank you.
You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
I think I'd rather not.
Without their visits, you can never hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1. The next, the following evening, when the bell tolls 1. The third, upon the same hour, the next night. The ghost floated up after saying to Ebenezer, "Remember, Ebenezer, what hath passed between us for your own sake." The ghost lifted up towards the window and out into the cold, black, deep, dark night. Scrooge rushed to the window, closed it. He tried to say humbug, but he stopped at the first syllable. And being from the emotion he had undergone, or the lateness of the hour, he went to bed without undressing and fell asleep upon the instant. Scrooge woke to the sound of a bell, now tolling a melancholy 1. Lights flashed up in the room upon the instant. Scrooge, starting up, saw himself face to face with the unearthly visitor. It was a strange figure, like a child, and being diminished to a child's proportions, from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, which was bright at one moment, and in another moment it was dark, and so the spirit fluctuated itself in its distinctness.
Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Long past?
No, your past. The things you shall see with me are but shadows of the things that once were.
What is your purpose here?
Your reclamation, Ebenezer. Your redemption. Rise and follow me. It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather or the lateness of the hour was not adapted to pedestrian purposes, for the ghost's grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose But seeing that the ghost was moving towards the window, he clasped his robe in supplication. I am mortal and liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand there, and you will be upheld in more than this. As these words were spoken, the spirit and Scrooge passed through a wall. They were now in the very busy thoroughfares of a city. Where passengers passed and repassed, all the strife and tumult of a real city. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here it was Christmas time again, but it was evening and the streets were lighted up. Scrooge and the spirit stopped at a certain warehouse door, and the spirit asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it? I was apprenticed here. Yes. They walked in, and looking at an old man in a Welsh wig, sitting on the highest desk in the building, Scrooge exclaimed, "What? It's old Fezziwig! Old Fezziwig! Oh, bless his heart! It's old Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig! Laid down his pen, looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7, rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, and laughed all over himself. From his shoes to his organ of benevolence, he cried out with a rich, oily, fat, jovial voice. Yo-ho, my boys! Then Scrooge saw his former self, now a young man, come briskly in, followed by his fellow apprentice, Dick Williams. Oh, that's Dick Williams! That's Dick Williams! There he is! Bless his heart! Dick Williams, he was always quite attached to me, was Dick. Oh, dear Dick Williams, dear, dear. Yo-ho, my boys, said Fezziwig. No more work tonight! It's Christmas Eve! Christmas Eve, my fine lads! Let's have the shutters up, hilly-ho! Clear away, my lads! Let's have lots of room here! Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in an instant. Every movable in the room was cleared away. Then entered a fiddler playing music. Then came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. And they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. And there was music, and there was dancing, and more dancing. And there was a great piece of cold roast. There was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies, plenty of beer. But the music filled the room as if so many little angels were singing there. And then, old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Tough couple, too. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the word. They danced a measure round. They danced better than any couple in the building. They danced and danced and danced all evening. The music filled the room. What a celebration at old Fezziwig. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations on either side of the door and, bowing to each individual person as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! During the whole of this time, Scrooge remembered everything. He enjoyed everything. And he underwent a strange agitation. It wasn't until this time, until the bright faces of his former self and Dick had turned from him, that he remembered the ghost and was conscious of it looking full upon him, while the bright light upon its head burnt very clear. It's a small thing, really, to make all these silly people so full of gratitude. Small, said Scrooge. Why is it not? Fezziwig spent but a few pounds of your mortal money. 3 or 4, perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise? But it's not that, Spirit. It's not that. He has the power to make us happy or unhappy, to make our service gay or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in looks or words or things so slight and insignificant it's impossible to add and count them up. What then? Why then, the happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. What's the matter? Nothing. Something, I think. No, Spirit, I should have liked to say a word or two to my clerk, Bob Cratchit, just now, that's all. Quick, my time grows near. This was not spoken to Scrooge, nor anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For now, Scrooge saw himself again, now much older, a grown man in the prime of his life. His face had not the rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to show the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion to the eye, which had shown the passion which had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but he sat by the side of a beautiful young girl, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled, and the bright light shone out from the ghost of Christmas past. To you, it means little, very little. Another idol has displaced me. What idol has displaced you? Cried Scrooge. You fear the world too much, Ebenezer. I have seen your nobler aspirations drop off one by one till the master passion, grey, envelops you. Have I not? What then? Even if I have grown much, much wiser, what then? I haven't changed towards you, have I? Our contract was an old one. It was made when we were poor and content to be so, until in good season we could change our worldly fortune with patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man. Why, have I ever sought release? Said Scrooge. In words? No, never. In what then? In a changed nature, in an altered spirit. Tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? A dowerless girl? Oh no. You, who measure everything by gain and money. I release you with a full heart for the love of him you once were. May you be happy, Ebenezer, in the life you have chosen. She left him. They parted. Spirit, remove me from this place. I told you.
The things you will see with me are but shadows of the things that once were. They are what they are. You can't blame me. Spirit, remove me. I cannot bear it. Take me back. Haunt me no longer!
And with this, the ghost of Christmas past vanished. Scrooge was conscious of being exhausted. He was also conscious of being back in his own room and being overcome with an irresistible drowsiness. And without being hardly able to reel the bed, he sank into a heavy sleep. Scrooge woke to the sound of the bell. In his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it and the adjoining sitting room, into which he now shuffled in his slippers, being attracted to a great light there, had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove. Crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light as if so many little mirrors were scattered there. Heaped on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, suckling pigs, great wreaths of sausages, juicy oranges, red-hot chestnuts, and cherry-cheeked apples. And such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney. Sat comfortably on the couch was a jolly giant, glorious to behold, and he bore a glowing torch and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he shuffled round the door. Come in! Come in and get to know me better, man! I am the ghost of Christmas present! Look upon me! Have you ever seen the likes of me before? Never. There are some upon this earth of yours, Ebenezer, who lay claim to know us, who do their deeds of ill will, hatred, bigotry, and selfishness in our name. Know that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us. Spirit, I will go with thee. If you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch me rope. And whether it was the pleasure of showing off this power that he had, or the ghost's own great, generous, kind nature, or his sympathy with every poor man in the world, it led him to Bob Cratchit's house on a snowy Christmas morning. The ghost of Christmas present stopped and smiled at the threshold and blessed Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Imagine that. Bob, who had but 15 bob a week, he pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet he blessed Bob Cratchit's four-roomed house. Invisible they walked in, and up rose Mrs. Cratchit, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which were cheap, and made a goodly show for sixpence. She laid out the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, the second of her daughters, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged his fork into the saucepan of mashed potatoes, and the two smaller Cratchits, a boy and a girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside they had smelt the goose and knew it to be their own. Well,
What has ever got your precious father then, and your brother Tiny Tim? Here comes father now, said Peter Cratchit, and in came Bob Cratchit, in his threadbare clothes, donned up and brushed to look seasonable, with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and his legs were supported by an iron frame. The younger Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim, bore him off to the wash house that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. Mrs. Cratchit says, "How did Tiny Tim behave today?" "Ah, good as gold," said Bob Cratchit. "Better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much. He thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me that he hoped that people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to know upon Christmas Day who made the lame beggar walk and blind men see." Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled even further when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool by the fire, while Master Peter Cratchit and the two ubiquitous younger Cratchits went off to fetch the goose, with which they returned in high procession. There never was such a goose. Bob Cratchit said that he had never seen such a goose cooked. The tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the entire family. God bless. Mr. Cratchit, Bob said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she would confess she had her doubts about the quantity of flour. At last, the dinner was done. Cloth was cleared, the hearth was swept, the fire made up. A jug with a compound being tasted and considered perfect. Apples and oranges were heaped upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts in the fire. As the chestnuts snapped and cracked in the fire, Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless." "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his as if he loved the child and wished to always have him by his side, and dreaded that he should be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me that Tiny Tim will live." "If the shadows are not altered by the future, the child will die." "No, no, Spirit. Say that he shall be spared." "If the shadows are not altered by the future, there is none of our race shall find him here." "But what of that? If he be like to die, he'd better do it, and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge bowed his head to hear his own words quoted by the ghost, and he was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man! If man you are in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant till you have discovered what the surplus is, and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the eyes of heaven, you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor father's child." Scrooge bowed under the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes downward. But he lifted them quickly when he heard his own name.
I give you Mr. Scrooge, cried Bob Cratchit. I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. Oh, the founder of the feast, indeed, Mrs. Cratchit said. Yes, I wish I had him here to give him a piece of my mind to feast on. He'd have a good appetite for it, too. My dear, it's the children. It's Christmas Day. I'm sure it's Christmas Day indeed, when one drinks the health of such an odious, hard, unfeeling, awful man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. No one knows it better than you, poor fellow. My dear, it's Christmas Day. The children. Well, I'll drink his health for the days. And for yours, not his. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man. I'm sure he'll be very merry and very happy. They all drank the toast after him, but this was the first of their proceedings that had no heartiness in it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family, and the mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. When it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than they were before, merely from Scrooge the Baleful being done with. And then the jug and the chestnuts went round and round, and by they had a song, a Christmas song, from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice and sang it very well indeed.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Saviour was born on Christmas Day.
There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. But they were happy and grateful and pleased with one another and contented with the time. And even as they faded, looking happier yet in the bright light shone from the ghost's torch at parting, Scrooge looked after them, especially on Tiny Tim to the last. It was a great surprise to hear a hearty laugh. It was even greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's and to find himself in a bright, clear, gleaming room with a spirit standing, smiling by his side, and looking at that same nephew with approving affability. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things that, although there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, Scrooge's niece, by marriage, laughed as heartily as he. And all their invited friends, not to be a bit behindhand, roared out lustily. He said that Christmas was a humbug. And my life, and he believed it too. Well, more shame from him, said Scrooge's niece. Oh, he's a comical old fellow, my dear, said Scrooge's nephew. That's to be sure, not as pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. Well, I'm sure he's very rich, Fred, said Scrooge's niece. At least you always tell me so. What of that, my dear? His wealth is of no consequence. He don't do any good with it. He doesn't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking he's ever going to do us good with it. Well, I have no patience for him, said Scrooge's niece. Scrooge's niece's sister and all the ladies present expressed the same opinion. Oh, I have, cried Scrooge's nephew. I'm sorry for him, and I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers his ill whims? Himself, always. Here he takes it on himself to be angry with us, not to come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He doesn't lose much of a dinner. Well, I think he loses a very good dinner indeed, said Scrooge's niece.
Well, he's given us plenty of merriment, that I am sure. And I think it ungrateful not to drink his health. Here's a glass of mulled wine at our hand ready at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge!
Uncle Scrooge!
They all cried. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man. He wouldn't take it from me, but may he have it nevertheless.
Uncle Scrooge!
Uncle Scrooge was so inconspicuously gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company and thanked them with an inaudible speech if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene went away with the last breath spoken by Scrooge's nephew, and the spirit and Scrooge were once again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many houses they visited, and all with a happy end. The ghost, he sat by sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close at home. By struggling men, and they were made patient with their greater hope. By poverty, and it was rich. In almshouse, hospital, jail, in misery's every refuge, he left his blessings and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it was only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts to this because the Christmas holidays seemed to be condensed into the time and space they passed together. It was strange also that although Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge noticed this, but never spoke of it until after a children's 12th night party when, looking on the ghost as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was gray. Are spirits' lives so short? My time upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight. Tonight at midnight. Hark you, the time grows near. And with this, the ghost of Christmas present vanished. And Scrooge saw him no further. But he remembered the prediction of Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, he beheld a phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, cried Scrooge. Am I not? The spirit and phantom gave no reply, but lifted up its hand and pointed onward. It moved away. Are you here to show me the things that have not happened, but will happen in time before us? Is that so, spirit? The phantom made no reply. The upper portion of its garment contracted in an instant in its fold, as if it inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, the silent shape Scrooge feared so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The ghost paused a moment, as observing his condition and giving him time to recover. Ghost of the future! I fear you more than any scepter I have seen, but that I know your purpose is to do me good, and that I wish to live to be another man from what I was. I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?
The ghost made no reply, but lifted up its hand and pointed onward. Lead on, spirit, lead on! The night is waning fast. It is a precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit, lead on! The ghost moved away as it had come toward him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They had hardly reached the city when Scrooge recoiled in fear, for now the scene had changed, and Scrooge found himself almost touching a bed. A bare, uncurtained bed, on which, under a ragged sheet, there lay an unwatched, unwept, uncared for body of a plundered, unknown man. Scrooge thought, what if this man could be raised up now? What would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice, hard-dealing, gripping cares? They brought him to a rich end truly. Here he lay, in a dark room where not a man, a woman, or a child could say that he was kind to them for this or that. And for the memory of that one kind word, I will be kind to him, unwatched, unwept, uncared for. Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave the lessons it teaches. Trust me. Let us go. Let me see some compassion connected to a death, or this dark room will be forever with me. The ghost conveyed Scrooge unto several streets familiar to his feet. And as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere could he be found. They entered Bob Cratchit's dwelling, the house they had visited before. And they found Mrs. Cratchit and the children seated round the fire. And it was very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were still as statues. They were looking up at Peter Cratchit, who bore a Bible before him. Mrs. Cratchit and the girls were engaged in sewing, but still, it was very quiet indeed. Mrs. Cratchit put the work upon the table and lifted up her hands to her face. The color hurts my eyes. They're better now. They get very weak by candlelight. I would not have weak eyes for your father when he comes home, for the world. It must be near his time. Past it, rather, Mother, said Peter Cratchit. But I think, Father, he walks much slower these days, Mother. I've known him to walk. I've known him to walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder, very fast indeed. But he was so light to carry, and your father loved him so much that it was no trouble. No trouble. Here comes your father now. And in came Bob Cratchit. They all rushed to meet him. In his comforter, his tea was ready for them on the bar. They all tried who could help him to it first. And then Bob got the two young Cratchits on his knees, and they laid each child a little cheek upon his face, as if to say, "Don't be grieved, Father." Bob was cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to the whole family. He praised the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. It'll be done well before Sunday. And you went to the grave today, Robert. I did, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good. to see how green a place it is. But you'll go there often, I told him. You would walk there on Sundays. Little child! My little child! He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and the child were farther apart, perhaps, than they were. Mrs. Cratchit kissed him. His daughters kissed him. The younger Cratchits kissed him. Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was from God.
Spirit, cried Scrooge. Something tells me our time of parting is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me, who was that man who we saw lying unwatched, unwept, uncared for on that bed? The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed Scrooge unto an iron gate. He paused to look around before entering. A churchyard. Here then was that wretched man whose name he was now to learn, lying underneath the ground. The spirit stood out among the graves and pointed down to one. Before I draw nearer to this stone to which you point, Spirit, answer me one thing. Are these but shadows of the things that shall be? Or are they the shadows of the things that may be only? Still the ghost pointed to the grave by which it stood. Scrooge drew nearer, trembling as he went, and following the finger, saw on the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I that man we saw lying dead upon that bed, unwatched, unwept, uncared for? The ghost pointed from the grave to Scrooge and back to the grave. No, Spirit, no. Please, kind Spirit, I am not the man I was. Why show me this if I am past all hope? I will honor Christmas all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirit of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that it teaches. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone. He lifted up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed and saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrank, collapsed, and dwindled into a bedpost. And yes, the bedpost was his own. The room was his own. And best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. Ah! Glorious! Glorious! He rushed to the window. He stuck out his head. Golden sunlight. Heavenly sky. Sweet, fresh air. Merry bells! Ah! Glorious! Glorious! He stuck his head up and noticed a boy in Sunday dress and called down to him, "What's today, my fine fellow? What's today?"
Today? Why, it's Christmas Day!
It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits did it all in one night. Of course they did. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Scrooge, he dressed himself all in his best. And at last, he got out into the street. By this time, people were pouring forth, as he had seen them with the Ghost of Christmas Past. And walking, he greeted each one with a delighted smile. He was so irresistibly kind and gentle in a word that 3 or 4 people said to him,
Good Christmas, sir.
"Good morning, sir. Happy New Year."
Merry Christmas.
Scrooge often said afterwards that of all the blithe sounds that he had ever heard, those were the blithest to his ears. That afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephews. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it. "Fred, it is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner, Fred. Will you let me in?" Let him in. He almost shook his arm off. It went in 5 minutes. Wonderful party. Wonderful games. Wonderful unanimity. Wonderful happiness. But Scrooge was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If only he could get there first, so that he might catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That was the very thing he set his heart into, and he did it. Yes, he did. 9 o'clock, no Bob. The clock struck 1/4 past, no Bob. He was 18 minutes and a half behind his hour. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see Bob Cratchit coming into the tank. Bob's hat was off before he entered the building, and he was quickly on his stool, hammering away with his pen, trying to make up for the hour of 9. "Hello, sir!" cried Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What mean you, sir? Coming in here at this time of the day?" "I am behind my time, sir." "You are?" "Yes, I think you are, sir. Walk this way, if you please." I am sorry, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "Now, I'll tell you what. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer, and therefore, I'm about to raise your salary. A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas, my fine fellow, than I have given you in many a years. I will raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. And we'll talk about your situation tonight, Bob, over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop. Make up the fire and buy another scuttle box before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he became a second father. He was as good a friend, as good a master, as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in this good old world. And it was always said of Scrooge that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed that knowledge. May that truly be said of us, and all of us. And as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one.